Welcome to Comparing Apples and Oranges in AL. Hey, I'm Eric, and today's topic is all about the equal sign in an if statement. It's about what you are able to compare and what you're not able to compare. So I think it's probably easier to show you guys what I'm talking about than talk. So here is my Visual Studio Code, and I just, as usual, started a new extension, and I think we can do all we want to do right here in the on open page trigger on customer list. So let's do that. So let's first make sure that we have some definitions in place. So if I do an if statement, I say if 4 equals 5, then something. Then let's actually not something. Let's do that's a nice program. So this is a statement, the if statement, and then we have a message statement afterwards. Inside the if statement, we have an expression. And this expression needs to be a Boolean expression because we're inside an if statement. So the if statement has a type requirement of what's inside it to be a Boolean expression. So if I do if 45 plus 56, that's an integer expression, which is clearly not a Boolean expression, and we'll get an error saying that cannot convert integer to Boolean. Seems logical. Other languages are way more liberal in their interpretation of what is true and false. And basically the lower you get in the that's perhaps the wrong way of saying it, but the closer you get to the machine, the more it's very often that a 0 from a binary perspective is false and everything else is true. But it varies from system to system, from language to language. But here in AL, which is Pascal, what you have inside an if statement has to be a Boolean expression. And one of the great ways of making a Boolean expression is, of course, with the equal sign. So if 1 equal 2, let's change this. The world is still sane. So if 1 equal 2, that's a Boolean expression. We can run this, and if my Docker is running, I think it looks like it is, we will get a message. The world is still sane. Whew. Well, you have to check these days, right? So that's a Boolean expression. But so this is 1 is equal 1. That's probably good. But what about this thing? If 1 is equal a string called 1, what happens there? Let's just try it out. So we're allowed to compile it. So 1 is not equal 1. Let's try one more. Let's try one variant, because this is actually an interesting sentence. So sometimes you can come to a situation where you are allowed to compare A to B, but you're not allowed to compare B to A. So let's see what happens here. So clearly 1 is not equal 1, which is true, right? They are truly different. But of course we can go in and say, okay, how if we type convert the one to be a string, and then run it again. Now I need to change the messages because it really means that it's this. So now they're like, but let's actually change this, because so remember that I said that what's inside an if state is just an expression. So if I do, we can do something like this. If I do result as a Boolean, then I can say result equal, and then let me grab this from inside the if statement. I'm going to get rid of all this. So now we have a Boolean expression, but we're not testing for the result inside an if statement. We're just running the Boolean expression as an expression, and in the case of the colon equal, which is an assign statement, then it's meaning that result is equal the output of, or result is equal to the result of this expression. So we can actually, just for our benefit here, we could say, okay, let's say the result is %1, and then simply pass the expression here as a parameter to message. So message is interesting. You can see that the values are type joker. So message you can pass any type of a value to, and it will do some magic behind the scene. So in this case, if we let's run this again. So in this case, the result of this, the type of this expression, would be Boolean. So hopefully we'll get a yes or no. The result is yes. Perfect. So 1 is equal 1 as long as it's two strings that we're comparing. Okay, so let's take something else. Let's take a D as a date and a DT as a date time. And we could go and say that D equal today, and then DT equal create date time from D and 0T. So those are now two variables that are expressing today. The other one with a 0T, so at 0 hours attached to it, but it's the same. So what happens if you say if D is equal DT? Oh, we get a squiggly line here. So operator equal cannot be applied to operands of type date and date time. So we're not able to compare a date and a date time. So now we have two options. If this is truly the if statement that we want to make, is this date equal this date time, then we have to type convert one of the sides. So we could do a type convert, say use the function called dt to date. So a function that takes a date time and return a date. And now the squiggly lines are gone, and hopefully this is the same. The result is yes. Whew. Today is still today. The world is still sane. We could add that also. So that's kind of easy. And the interesting thing here then, so far what we've seen is that what if can work with are certainly primitive types, but they have to match them. The integer versus string is kind of weird that that's allowed, but I think that's an old Pascal convention. but it didn't work. So one equal text string one was not equal. But all these are primitive types. They're not complex types. So what happens if we change this into a complex type? So let's do this. How about this? So J1 is a JSON object and J2 is also a JSON object. And we can do JSON1 read from, and then let's create a piece of JSON like this. And we'll just copy this. So now we have two pieces of JSON, and they are certainly the same, right? So how do we test that they are the same? So let's do if J1 is equal J2. Oh, I was this close to believe it this worked, but it does not work. We get the squiggly lines. So operator equal cannot be applied to operands of type JSON object and JSON object. So if you were working in C#, this would work, but it would also never be true, because as soon as you in the .NET world, if you're working with something that's actually an object, not a core type, whatever they're called, then what the variable actually is a pointer, meaning that they're pointing to the same thing. So if we in C# did J2 is equal J1, they would point to the same thing, so they would be the same. But if they're pointing to the same value, but in two different spots, they will not be the same, because they're pointed to two different places. Not that this video is going to be about pointers. So okay, so what can we do here? Let's actually just make sure that these are the same. So let's look at the values are. Let's make sure that these two are the same. Looks like they're the same, right? So this is okay. So already now we can kind of see one way to do this, which is, it's a cheating way, but it's kind of a great way of doing it, because you can see that what message is doing is that it's converting it into a string in order to show it on screen. And we have a magic command that will do that for us. We already used it once, and that command is, let's undo back to this guy. So if we do format J1 equal format J2, now format turns a joker into a string, meaning that any value you have in the system, turn it into a string. I think most values will be formatted logically and actually show the content. There might be some that do not do that. Let me know in the comments below if you find something that you cannot format. But let's try to see if this works. It worked. So now we have compared two JSON objects. And the interesting thing here is that we don't really care about what format is doing, as long as it's doing the same. So imagine that, let's say this was int and those were integers. And I is equal something that's too big. That's probably and this is D also. So can there be cases where we would end up in this being false? And there could be if the format is controlled by something. So let's say that we do format. So let's actually just run this for a second. Let's make sure we get the yes here. We do. So that is good. But what about if we start saying all that if format, this one is 2 and this one is 9. No, I actually go with 1. So standard format 1 and standard format 9. Those are still the same. Maybe I should do this with decimals instead. That's probably better. Let's do decimal, then add in a dot somewhere. See if we can do this. What I'm trying to achieve is the fact that we suddenly have something that is formatted differently. So if you're depending on somebody else formatting, you might end up in a situation where the two things you're comparing are not formatted the same way, which potentially can mean that, so you get my point. I think time is running here. So the point is that format might give you a different way of formatting the numbers based on, some formatting needs a comma and some want to fix decimals and whatever. So be sure that you're in control of the format. Anyway, let's hurry up. So this whole video basically started with me. I was working on something on the simple object designer, and I had a need to compare two records. So let's try to work with records. So let's do C1. That's a record. Wow, custom record, right? And C2 is also a customer record. Maybe C2. No, let's just start here. So here we have these, and let's do C1 find first and C2 find last. How about that? So we clearly have two different customers if there's more than one customer in our database, and I think there is. So now we're back to the same problem as before. The squiggly line saying operator equal cannot be applied to operands of type record and type record customer and record customer. So yeah, they're the same, but they're not the same. Again, because you cannot put a complex data type into a Boolean expression, or in an equal expression at least. And now we already figured out the trick, because we could probably just use format. So let's actually see what happens when we do format on a customer. And actually, I think if we just did this, so we're just passing a customer record as a parameter to message. Let's see what happens. So now you can see that we're basically getting the entire record. Well, almost the entire record, but we're getting most of the record, and we're getting the most of the record in, you see there's a space here, which is not really a space, that's a tab character. So this is a tab separated list. In the old days of Nav and Navision, This was actually a comma separated list, which introduced other problems with what if a value had a comma in it and so on. Now it's a tab separated list. You can even see it on the tooltip, because the tooltip is formatted differently than the message. And what we could say, okay, but there might be other ways to compare a record, because we could how about if we do, let's try one. So if I do c1 dot system ID equals c2 system ID, no squiggly line. So now we're actually checking if the system ID is the same. Let's see if it is. It's not. So these two are clearly not the same. The same record. Okay, so let's stay with that one just for a bit, and then instead let's make C2 temporary, because this might be a case which in the simple object this designer, the case was that I cached some information on how something looked, and then at a later process I verified that the world is still looking as I would think it would. Otherwise I needed to do things, right? So I need to make sure that nothing was changed since something happened. And in this case we'll just do temporary. So let's find this guy, and then let's do C2 copy C1, and then C2 insert, and C2 find first. So any bets on the result? Are these two the same, or are they different? It's clearly the same customer. They are the same. So that's interesting again, because so a system ID is actually so what Microsoft promises with the system ID is that it's unique on the table, not across tables. And in this case, the copy function will actually copy that piece also. So let's try something else. Let's see, what if we do c2 dot transfer fields, and we want to transfer some from C1, and what do we want to do with the let's actually look at what order. So we will do, so init primary key fields default true. If this primary is true and the records are in the same table, the timestamp and the primary key fields of destination will be changed. If the primary is true and the if this parameter is true and the records are in the same table, both the timestamp and the primary key fields of the destination record will be changed. If this parameter is true and the records are not in the same table, then the primary key fields of the destination record will be changed, but the timestamp of the destination record will not be changed. If this is false, neither the timestamp nor the primary key fields will of the blah blah will be changed. Okay, let's see what happens if we don't ignore that parameter. Actually, I want to do one more thing here before this video is getting way too long. So now they're not the same, but I think our primary key now has changed. So let's actually do one more test here and do the format C1 equal format. Oh, I can't see this because I might be at format C2. Right, so we get both of them. So now we have a chance to actually let's add a breakpoint Also, let's just check how the C2 record is looking. See if we get a breakpoint here. There we go. And there's actually a cool trick in the the debugger now. So we could mouse over C2, and if we're lucky and the editor thinks something, and in some cases it works, but we can actually go down here and then I can write C2, press enter, and we get the record down here so we can look at it. And we have the primary key value, so that looks good. So let's continue. So system ID are different, content is the same in this case. So if we are doing transfer field, let's actually go back and see that with the copy. Let me see if I can get rid of the breakpoint before this thing starts. So that's a yes. Another way would be that we would actually go in and then create a record ref based compare function that would look at fields that are alike and then compare them, and you set up for rules for which fields should be compared and so on. But there are options even on records, but it's all about, whenever you're in this situation, all about changing the complex type into a primitive type so you can do the comparison. And system ID is an awesome way of doing this if you just want to identify a record. We could also have used the record ID function. Format is awesome for controlling a content. Be aware that the system fields are not included in the format, so that might be a challenge if you want to make sure that they have the exact same timestamp or so. Anyway, that's a lot on just an equal sign in an if statement. But as I said, I was juggling with how is the best way of me to compare that some records were actually whether they have changed or not since I did something, and I thought it would be an interesting topic for a video. So I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below. Remember to subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.